My name is Ava. I'm 25 years old. Today I'm going to talk about the day that my family said I had failed. Then they saw me arriving at the family reunion in a luxury car. It's a pleasure to have you here. Stay tuned until the end and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story has gone. And click on like, subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories here on the channel. I don't think my mother ever looked at me and saw a daughter. I think she saw a burden. Someone who came into her life and immediately made it heavier. From the time I was a teenager, she made it clear I wasn't what she wanted. I wasn't pretty like my cousins. I wasn't smart like my brother. And I sure as hell wasn't obedient like she expected. You'll never amount to anything, Ava. You're just lazy. That was her favorite line. Sometimes it was said with a smirk, other times with such disgust that I felt physically sick. The rest of the family didn't bother hiding how they felt. My uncles would mock me during dinners, asking if I was still failing at life. My aunt once told me to my face, "Not everyone is meant to succeed. Some people are just background characters." The only time I ever felt noticed was when I was being criticized. At 19, everything exploded. I had dropped out of college after my third mental breakdown that year. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't fake being fine anymore. When I told my mom, she didn't ask if I was okay. She slapped the table and screamed, "Of course you quit. You always quit. You're pathetic." I remember standing there, shaking. I had never seen such hate in someone's eyes directed at me. That night, I packed my things and left. No one stopped me. No one called to check if I made it anywhere. I moved into a tiny studio apartment I could barely afford with the money I made waiting tables. It had mold on the ceiling and rats under the fridge, but it was mine. The holidays came and went. My phone never rang. I saw on social media that the family kept gathering, laughing, smiling. I was erased like I never existed. I started to believe maybe I didn't. There were nights I laid on the floor of that apartment, crying so hard my body cramped. I had no friends left. I had no family. I didn't even have a plan. Just a box of cheap tea bags, a broken heater, and a pair of sneakers that let water in when it rained. And yet somehow, I kept waking up. I found a job at a small health food store that sold natural soaps and oils. The owner, a woman named Rhonda, took a liking to me. She said I had an eye for detail and a calm energy that customers appreciated. For the first time in years, someone saw something good in me. It was Rhonda who encouraged me to start experimenting with making my own bath products. At first, I did it just for fun, mixing essential oils and herbs in my kitchen. I gave a few to neighbors and co-workers, and they started asking for more. I created an online store, took photos with my cracked phone, and waited. At first, nothing happened. For weeks, not a single order. Then one day, someone tagged my products in a TikTok video about self-care on a budget. The video went viral. Within days, I had more orders than I could handle. I stayed up nights wrapping soaps and labeling jars with shaky hands, terrified I would mess everything up. But I didn't. I pushed through. By 24, I had opened my own small shop. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I reinvested every penny I made. Hired 2 employees. Added skincare lines. I still lived in a modest apartment, but I had heating now, and a bed I didn't have to assemble from a free pile. Then, out of nowhere, I received a group message from my cousin inviting me to the annual family reunion. It had been 6 years. "We miss you, Ava. Let's catch up. Life's too short." I stared at the screen for hours. Part of me wanted to throw my phone. The other part wanted to see their faces. Not because I missed them, but because I needed closure. I needed to walk into that room as someone they wouldn't recognize. So I said yes. I bought a new outfit. I rented a luxury car. Not to show off. Just to remind myself that I wasn't the same girl they called a failure. As I pulled up to that reunion, I felt my hands tremble. Not from fear. From something else. I was about to face the people who buried me alive. And I wanted them to see what grew out of the dirt. I didn't sleep the night before the reunion. I kept thinking about how they would react. Would they recognize me? Would they pretend nothing happened? Part of me hoped they'd act shocked, just so I could finally say all the things I'd rehearsed for years. But another part, the bigger part, Was scared they'd act like they had every right to welcome me back. The morning of the reunion, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized myself. I wasn't the skinny, pale girl who left home with a backpack and a few wrinkled clothes. My skin looked healthy. My posture had changed. There was something new in my eyes. Maybe it was confidence. Maybe it was exhaustion. Either way, it was mine. As I drove, I kept thinking about Rhonda. About that first day at the shop, when she handed me a free lunch and said, "Eat, honey. You look like no one's taken care of you in a long time." She was right. No one had. When the video of my products went viral, I thought it was a fluke. I stayed up for nights filling orders, terrified the success would disappear overnight. I didn't have a warehouse. I didn't even have proper packaging. I used hand-cut labels and recycled tissue paper. But people kept coming back. Customers sent me messages saying my soaps helped with their eczema, their kids' skin conditions, their confidence. One woman told me my roseoat bar reminded her of her grandmother. That message made me cry. There were days I'd fall asleep at the table while mixing ingredients. I burnt out 3 cheap blenders before I could afford an industrial one. I had no marketing degree, no business mentor. Just instinct, trial and error, and a deep fear of going back to who I was. I stopped telling people how I grew up. Even when journalists reached out for my story, I kept it surface level. I didn't want pity. I wanted respect. And I knew that respect, especially as a young woman who started from nothing, had to be earned 10 times over. Every time I got a new review or a returning customer, I felt like I'd won a tiny war. Every order was a silent scream of defiance. Every dollar reinvested was a middle finger to the people who said I'd be nothing. So when that reunion invitation came, I knew it wasn't about reconciliation. It was curiosity, maybe even greed. They must have seen the car, the clothes, the photos online. And now they wanted me back, not as Ava the failure, but as Ava the survivor. But they didn't know what it cost me. They didn't know the nights I didn't eat, so I could pay for ingredients. The winter my heat got shut off because I spent the last of my savings on a wholesale shipment. The day I passed out from exhaustion at the post office. They didn't know any of that. And I wasn't sure they deserved to. Still I was going. Not for them. For me. To walk into that house and take up space. To let them see the woman they tried to break, and failed. What would you do if it were you? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe and activate the bell to receive all notifications so you don't miss the next story. I pulled up to the house in a sleek black rental. One of those understated luxury models that looked expensive but not flashy. It hummed as it stopped, not a sputter, not a groan. It was the kind of car no one in my family had ever driven, let alone expected to see me in. The reunion was at Aunt Valerie's mansion. Of course it was. She had always been the self-proclaimed matriarch, the one who threw the best parties and talked the most trash. As I stepped out of the car, all conversations in the front yard paused. Heads turned. Drinks stalled mid-sip. I saw widened eyes, furrowed brows, a few whispered guesses. It was surreal. I adjusted the hem of my blazer, smoothed my hair, and walked with a calm I didn't fully feel. Every step toward that front door was a rebellion. "Ava," my cousin Danielle finally said, blinking at me like she had seen a ghost. "Hi," I replied. That was all. Just hi. Danielle rushed over, arms outstretched, her designer perfume already hitting my nose before she got close. "You look so wow. We didn't even recognize you." I gave her a polite hug. Not too close. Not too warm. Just enough. Inside, the place was packed. Every relative I hadn't seen in years was there, talking loud, eating expensive hors d'oeuvres, pretending like they were in a magazine spread. No one had aged well. That was my first cruel, honest thought. They all looked tired. Worn. As if life had flattened them slowly. And yet, they still carried that same arrogance. That same smug certainty that they were better. Until they saw me. Uncle Rick, who used to joke that I'd end up flipping burgers for life, came up with a forced grin. "So what are you doing now, Ava?" "Modeling. Skincare products. I own a brand," I said flatly. "Oh, like an Etsy thing?" "Started there. Now it's in 12 stores. And I opened a shop last year." He blinked. Laughed awkwardly. Good for you. Never would have guessed. Exactly. I walked past him. I spotted my mother near the buffet table, laughing too hard at something someone said. She turned, locked eyes with me, and froze. Just for a second. Then she plastered on the fakest smile I had ever seen. Ava, honey. You made it. I didn't hug her. I didn't kiss her cheek. I just nodded. You look different. I am. She nodded too, her smile faltering. We were all so worried about you. You know, after you left. You weren't. She blinked. What? You weren't worried. You didn't call. You didn't even ask where I went. You were glad I left. The table behind us went quiet. I think you're being dramatic, she said softly, looking around nervously. I tilted my head. You called me pathetic. You said I'd never be anything. And now I'm standing here in front of you. And I can see it. You hate that I proved you wrong. She opened her mouth, but no words came. It wasn't a dramatic scene. No shouting. No crying. Just truth. Simple and cold. I walked away before she could respond. Aunt Valerie cornered me next. We're all so proud of what you've done, sweetheart. You've grown so much. You never liked me, I said. Her face twisted, trying to maintain that hostess smile. That's not true. You said I was useless. That I'd end up alone. She laughed nervously. We all say things we don't mean. No. You meant it. You just didn't think I'd remember. She walked away. I didn't mingle. I stood near the back patio doors, sipping a sparkling water and observing. I could see them glancing at me. The whispers. The curiosity. I had become something they couldn't define. Something they couldn't dismiss. And they didn't know how to deal with that. For once, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't invisible. But I wasn't exactly welcomed either. I was a complication. A reminder that people can grow even after being discarded. And that made me dangerous to them. It wasn't even 30 minutes into the reunion before the fake smiles started to wear thin. People were trying to figure out how to place me now. They didn't know if they should be congratulating me, apologizing, or just ignoring me like before. Most chose a weird mix of all three. I wasn't there to cause a scene, but I wasn't going to let them rewrite history either. The real shift happened during dinner. We were seated around a long white linen-covered table under a massive chandelier. I was at the far end, squeezed between two cousins who didn't know what to say to me. The conversations were loud and forced. Glasses clinked. Forks scraped plates. And then my mother stood up, holding a wine glass in her hand. I just want to say how happy I am to have the whole family together, she said with a practiced smile. And I'm especially proud of my daughter Ava. She's come a long way. It's just amazing to see how much she's grown. There were nods, a few weak claps. My jaw clenched. I didn't plan to speak. I really didn't. But something in me snapped. I stood up slowly. You're proud of me now? My mother blinked, still smiling, but I could see the tension in her eyes. Of course, honey. You're proud of the business. The success. But what about when I was 19? Crying on the floor of a studio apartment with mold on the ceiling and rats under the fridge? Were you proud then? The room fell silent. You called me lazy. Pathetic. You said I'd never be anything. And when I left, no one called. No one asked if I was alive. Ava, that's not fair. Aunt Valerie started. No. What's not fair is pretending we're a happy family. What's not fair is rewriting history because now it's convenient. I was invisible to all of you until I showed up in a nice car. My voice didn't rise. I didn't cry. I just told the truth, plain and clear. You don't get to clap for me now if you weren't there when I was drowning. I sat down. No one spoke. My mother looked stunned. She had always controlled the narrative, always spun things her way. But I had taken the air out of the room. A few people avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the night. A few others, surprisingly, came up quietly murmuring things like, I didn't know, or I'm sorry for how we acted. It didn't feel satisfying. It felt hollow. Too little, too late. Later, my brother, who had always been the golden child, sat beside me on the patio. I know I wasn't there for you, he said. I guess I thought you were just being dramatic. Like Mom said. I nodded. I know. I saw the video that went viral. I saw how hard you've worked. It's impressive. I didn't thank him. I didn't have the energy. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I'm not here to make anyone feel better either. He nodded, and for once didn't argue. Before I left, I went back into the house, looked at my mother one last time. She was sitting alone on the couch, swirling her wine glass, staring at nothing. I walked up to her. You don't get to be proud of me, I said. She looked up. Ava, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out the door. I drove home that night with the windows down. The air was cool, quiet, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like that 19-year-old girl begging to be seen. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was space. Room to breathe. I parked outside my apartment, modest but mine, and sat there for a while. My phone buzzed a few times. Missed calls from my mother. A text from Aunt Valerie. Let's talk soon. Family is everything. I turned the screen off without answering. Over the next few weeks, they kept trying. My cousin sent a long message saying how proud everyone was and how they didn't realize what I was going through. My brother sent a link to a podcast on forgiveness. My mom left me a voicemail every few days, always sounding tired, always acting like nothing happened. Just calling to check in, sweetie. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I was angry, but because I knew what came next if I did. They'd pull me back in. They'd rewrite things, water them down, make jokes about the past like it was nothing. I'd be expected to be the bigger person, to move on, to let it go. And if I didn't, then I'd be the problem again. I wasn't going back there. One afternoon, I cleaned out an old box in my closet. Inside was a folder with photos, me at 6 years old in a Halloween costume, me at 10 holding a science fair trophy, me at 16 staring blankly at a birthday cake. My mother had sent them years ago, trying to guilt me into reconciling. Back then, I had tucked them away, unsure if I could handle the memories. Now I looked at them and felt detached. Not bitter. Not nostalgic. Just clear. That girl was still me, but she wasn't waiting for them anymore. I took the photos and put them in an envelope. No note. No return address. Just an old stamp. I mailed them to my mother. A quiet way of saying, here. Take your past back. I'm not carrying it anymore. Around that same time, I made another decision. I started looking at properties out of state, small towns, quiet places. I wanted a garden. I wanted air that smelled like trees and not car exhaust. I wanted to wake up and not think about how close I was to people who once broke me. Within 3 months, I had signed a lease on a small cottage 2 hours away. It had peeling paint, overgrown hedges, and the kind of porch you could sit on with a mug of coffee and feel the day unfold slowly. I didn't tell anyone I was moving. I didn't post about it. I just went. The day I left, I stood in the middle of my now empty apartment and looked around. I remembered every breakdown on that floor. Every candle I lit while whispering prayers to no one. Every night I wrapped myself in 3 blankets and told myself to hold on. And then I closed the door behind me. My new home sat at the edge of a sleepy little town where the loudest sounds were birds and the occasional barking dog. It wasn't much by most standards. The kitchen counters were outdated, and the plumbing groaned whenever I turned on the shower. But every inch of it was mine. I painted the walls myself. Hung string lights on the porch. Planted a rosemary bush out back because it reminded me of the soaps I used to make in my apartment kitchen. There was no fanfare. No big announcement. I simply began again. For the first few weeks, I didn't hear from my family at all. It was like they finally realized I was serious about the silence. My phone stayed quiet, and I started sleeping better. I woke up early to water my plants, opened the windows while I worked, and found myself smiling at nothing in particular. It was a slow kind of healing. The kind that doesn't come with grand gestures, just small, steady choices. Saying no when you're expected to say yes. Choosing peace over tradition. Letting go without bitterness. One day, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. I opened it slowly, already knowing who it was from. My mother's handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. Ava, I know I wasn't what you needed. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that I think about you every day. I keep replaying all the times I chose silence or cruelty when I should have chosen love. I don't know if it's too late to say it, but I'm sorry for everything. There was more, but I stopped reading. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. It wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just another piece of the past. And I wasn't building my life around that anymore. Instead, I built routines. I walked to the farmer's market every Saturday. I adopted an old dog from the local shelter. His name was Gus, and he followed me around the house like he'd been waiting for me his whole life. The business kept growing slowly but steadily. I hired a remote assistant to help with emails and fulfillment. I stopped checking my social media obsessively. I stopped needing validation from people who once called me nothing. And for the first time in my life, I started to feel safe. Not just from others. From myself. From that voice that used to echo every insult I'd ever heard. That voice had grown quieter here. One night, I sat on the porch with Gus at my feet and a cup of tea in my hands. The sun was setting, washing the sky in gold and lavender. I thought about all the versions of myself that came before this one. The girl who cried in bathrooms. The girl who begged to be loved. The girl who thought surviving was the best she could do. She didn't disappear. She just evolved. And in that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. No revenge. No dramatic redemption arc. Just me, finally choosing a life that didn't revolve around proving anything to anyone. Sometimes people think peace is boring. That you need closure to move on. But what they don't understand is, some of us don't need apologies. We need distance. We need the freedom to grow in soil that isn't poisoned. That's what I had now. Not a happy ending. But a beginning that belonged only to me. If you like stories like these, click like, subscribe, activate the bell and send it to someone you think will also like it.